Hello and welcome back. So to the last video, this is continuation with that. On to this, we will speak about listing regulation 2015, where specifically regulation 38 and other regulations will be mentioned out there. So यहाँ पे you will understand the minimum level of public shareholding and the manner to increase public shareholding that is specified in regulation 38 and other regulation that is important for the company to go ahead and remain listed on a stock exchange. So let's not utilize much of your time. Even this regulation will be bifurcated. Altogether there are total 103 regulations for you. So starting off with, I'll just go through a little bit of introduction for yourself, and we'll try to cope up with the differences that can possibly lead to a better understanding. All right. So starting off with for the listing regulations. So here we are. So listing regulations 2015. There are total 103 regulations. And these regulations are further divided into 12 chapters. Of to which there are other things that are also be required to be abide by the company to make sure that they are uh, working out with the stock exchange as per the requirement. Of to which SEBI regulates the issue of different type of security by different type of regulations. So some of them, let me just put it across here for you. So first thing first is, let's just bifurcate the serial number, type of security, and then what SEBI regulation apply. So what I'm going to write along with this, LODR has to be complied with. Let's just get this started. To the first one we have specified securities. It can possibly be equity and convertible securities on main board or SME or Indian depository receipts. What has to be complied with? SEBI, ICDR regulations. Moving on to the next, the second type of security, we have non-convertible debt securities. This is for SEBI issue and listing of debt securities regulations 2008. On to the next, third one, we have non-convertible redeemable preference shares. For this, SEBI issue and listing of non-convertible redeemable preference shares, non-convertible redeemable preference share regulations 2013. So next is securitized debt instrument which is SEBI public offer and listing of securitized debt instruments year 2008. On to this, coming to the last one that we have is fifth for mutual funds. Which is SEBI mutual funds regulations 1996. This is how it looks. Apart from LODR, these are the legal compliance issued by SEBI, which are required to be complied along with the LODR regulations. So any kind of specified securities, equity convertible securities on main board, SFT or ITP or IDR has to be complied as per the SEBI ICDR regulation. Non-convertible debt security, SEBI issue of listing debt security regulation 2008. Non-convertible redeemable preference shares, SEBI issue and listing of non-convertible redeemable preference shares. To next, we have securitized debt instrument, that is SEBI public offer listing of security debt instrument regulation 2008, and at last these are mutual funds. So for that is SEBI mutual fund regulation 1996. Now in addition to these regulation, as we speak, entities also required to comply with the listing regulation 2015, which is further categorized. Now this is what not we are covering on this particular video. This is what we're going to start off with, and to which we will start from understanding the very first chapter, that is from 1 to 3, that is preliminary. All right, now before I get into the details around it, let me just give you a heads up. So in order to give the effect to the requirement of listing regulation, a simplified listing agreement was introduced, which was SEBI LODR for the entities. Now, prior to the SEBI regulations, when the listing agreement was in picture, the company was required to execute a fresh listing agreement with stock exchange within 6 months from the date of notification of LODR regulations. So as this was introduced on September 2015. Now onto this, there were questions regarding the existing case or anything which is required to be complied with for the listing agreement which was existing prior to this date and the LODR regulation coming to the picture. So SEBI said, notwithstanding such novation, any action taken or purported to have been done or taken by the stock exchange or SEBI, any inquiry or investigation commenced, show cause noted, issues in respect of the existing listing agreement shall deemed to have been done or taken under this LODR. So any kind of action, anything which is only the change is basically the fresh agreement is being executed, and at the end we will follow everything as was in the listing agreement. If there were any sort of decision, action, investigation, show cause notice was issued as if this was a listing agreement, right? Regulation 1 is nothing much, but it is a short title and commencement. Very simple. So SEBI, as power given to it by SEBI Act 1992, the listing obligation disclosure requirement, which is ICDR as we know, or listing regulation 2015, came into picture on 2nd September 2015, and we expect, that's what it says, we expect the regulation to be effective from 90th day from this notification, that is 1st of December 2015, and this was mentioned in official gazette, to which there were two regulations which were of immediate effect, that was 3 sub-regulation 4 and regulation 31. which we will talk later onto this chapter for sure. Speaking about regulation 2, this is for definitions. Now, definition, what would you get to understand? What does Act specify? That is, Act is SEBI 1992. Board, wherever mentioned, is SEBI. Designated securities. Specified securities that can be non-convertible debt security, इसको हम break down कर देते हैं. These securities means specified securities. Now, first is non-convertible debt securities. Next we have is non-convertible preference shares, perpetual debt instrument, units by mutual fund, perpetual non-cumulative preference shares, IDR, securitized debt instrument, plus any other securities specified by board. Then specified security, under the definition, it also describes specified securities. For specified securities means equity shares and convertible securities. That is equity shares and moving on to next, it talks about what is financial year. So financial year will be as same as defined under Companies Act 2030. Then it talks about listing agreement. Agreement entered into a recognized stock exchange, an entity on application of that entity to the recognized exchange undertaking to comply with the conditions of the listed for the listing of designated securities. So इसको टाइटल दे देते हैं. ये था ए, ये थी सेकंड डेफिनेशन, ये है थर्ड, ये है फोर्थ, ये है फिफ्थ और ये है सिक्स्थ. ठीक है. अब लिस्टिंग एग्रीमेंट इज बेसिकली agreement is executed between the recognized stock exchange and entity who is willing to comply listing regulations and have its securities listed. On to the designated stock exchange. Okay, so for the people who need these notes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this on the Telegram group. So who all are watching this videos for the first time, they can totally go ahead and make the most of the pictures that will be sent to the Telegram group that I have created for each and every one of us. Thank you so much. Moving on to this, we are discussing with the sixth definition. What I'm trying to do is I was thinking if we can just make it here. So this will be the last thing I'll be mentioning here. That is point F, which is fugitive economic offender. Simple, decently speaking or professionally speaking, ones who has escaped. So an individual who has declared fugitive economic offender under section 12 of Fugitive Economic Offender Act 2018, who has done some inappropriate or unethical practice and has run away. Has run away from the eyes of law. Basically, has escaped. Moving on to regulation 3. Now, on to regulation 3, we will understand the applicability. So, to this chapter, chapter 1, preliminary, under which we are discussing regulation 3, which talks about applicability. All right, so these will be the names that I'm about to mention, on the description that I'm about to give. These will be the one to which LODR listing regulation applies. So first we have on the list is specified securities listed on main board or SME or ITP, that is institutional trading platform. Second, non-convertible debt securities. Non-convertible redeemable preference share, perpetual debt instrument, perpetual non-cumulative preference shares. Right. Third, Indian depository receipts. Fourth, securitized debt instrument. Fifth, units by mutual fund. And at last, sixth, any other securities specified by SEBI. Now, in the listing regulation 2015, the term listed entity is used instead of listed company. So whenever you're talking about the listing regulation, it's not listed company, instead it is listed entity. For listed entity, not listed company as per listing regulation. So not this, we will reuse the word entity. To cover the appropriate entity under this ambit of regulation, some entity may or may not be the company. So trying to cover each and everything, it's just instead of keeping it narrow, it has broadened its structure. So this was your first chapter for LODR. To the second chapter, which talks about regulation 4, and that talks about principle governing disclosure and obligation of listed entity. Let's go ahead. Principles I have incorrect. principle governing disclosures and obligation of listed entity. Cool. So now principle governing disclosure and obligation. Let's get this one started. To which the listed entity which has listed securities shall make disclosure and abide by its obligation under these regulations along with in accordance with the following principle. That's the first of what it states. So first, listed entity which has listed securities two duties: to make disclosure. What they need to do is need to make disclosure and abide by its obligation. Abide by its obligation under these तो यहाँ पे shall कर रहा हूँ, shall make disclosure and abide by its obligation under these regulation in accordance with following principles. All right. Now we'll subdivide this. It has to be prepared information prepared and disclosed in accordance to applicable standard of accounting and financial disclosure. This is first. Now the information is required to be disclosed and prepared in accordance with the accounting standard and financial disclosure. That's one. Second, the listed entity, which we will refer as LE now, listed entity, to implement the prescribed accounting standard in letter and spirit of the in letter and spirit of the preparation of financial statement. Next, listed entity refrain from misrepresentation and ensure the information provided to the recognized stock exchange and investor is not misleading. Misrepresentation and ensure information provided to the recognized stock exchange and investors are not misleading. Moving me to the other point, listed entity provide adequate and timely information to recognized stock exchange. And investor, of course. On listed entity to ensure that dissemination made under provision of these regulation and circulars made thereunder are adequate, accurate, explicit, timely, presented in a simple language. Okay, so what all the listed entity needs to ensure that the disseminations made under these provisions of these regulations, okay, and circulars made thereunder are adequate, accurate, explicit, timely, and presented in a simple language. And simple language, to which this is A, B, C, D, and E. Moving to the next, number 2. Second principle says the listed entity shall seek to protect and facilitate the exercise of all rights to shareholders. Point 3, which is in relation to this, if I say adequate and timely disclosures. Now the listed entity is shall provide adequate and timely disclosure, but shall not be limited to and including, should not be limited to, which also includes sufficient and timely information to shareholder concerning the for date, time, location, and agenda of general meeting. Next, rights attached to all series and classes of shares. The rights attached to series and all class of shares. The capital structure and arrangement that enables certain shareholders, so we will write it here, capital structure and arrangements that enable certain shareholders to obtain a degree of control which is not in accordance with their equity ownership, or should I say disproportionate to equity shareholding. So the first thing first says time, date, and location of general meeting. Second says right attached to the series and all class of shares. And there is a change in the capital structure, and due to arrangement, any shareholders are able to access the control on the company due to their equity share, which is not in accordance with their holding. That has to be given to the shareholder as well as to the investor with adequate and timely information in accordance with. There are two more principles. I'll try to just wrap up till this chapter 1. Onto the next chapter 2. Onto the next we'll come up with chapter 3 and accordingly. So moving on to next, the first is The listed entity shall ensure equitable treatment for all shareholder including minority and foreign. यहाँ पे एक छोटा सा ब्लॉक बना लेते हैं. Listed entity ensure equitable treatment to all shareholders including minority and foreign shareholders. And last point of this chapter 2 regulation 4 says the listed entity shall recognize rights of its stakeholders and encourage cooperation between listed entity and stakeholders. So this will be all for this video. I'll just quickly take you through from the beginning as a quick review. Let me just quickly take you through. So we were talking about listing regulation, and apart from listing regulation, there are other laws that are specified by SEBI that we are required to comply with. On September 2015, LODR regulation was introduced, and until was mentioned that on the 90th day, which is 1st September 2015, it shall be implemented. There are total 103 regulations distributed into 12 different chapters. In this video, we have completed the chapters that I'll be sharing with you. With the immediate effect, these two regulations were being put into the effect. The chapter 1 is all about first to third regulation, that is preliminary, which talks about the short titles and the commencement. The second is all about definitions, of which these are the definitions that we have discussed. And to the third regulation, it shows the applicability of the listing regulation. Moving on to the chapter 2, it says principle governing disclosure and obligation. So the first thing first says the listed entity needs to disclose and abide by the obligation under which they need to provide the timely information, follow the accounting standards, and provide adequate and timely information to the investors. Plus, their rights shall not be limited to the information which shall be the date and time for location of a general meeting, rights attached to the series and class of shares, or letting them know about the information in regards to if there is any change in the capital structure, somebody has excessive right in the case of the ownership that they presently have. And they need to ensure the treatment for the rights of the minority and for the foreign shareholders are maintained, and they need to recognize the right of the stakeholder and encourage the cooperation between listed entity and stakeholders. So this video will be till the second chapter. For the next video, I'll be uploading tomorrow or lately by day after, to make sure that we are able to study back and forth for this chapter. This is again related to chapter 3 of corporate governance, where your subject is now known as governance, risk management, compliance, and ethics. So thank you so much, and like, share, subscribe, and let me know if something can be improved. Thank you so much. Have a good one.